Welcome back to the deep dive. When you think about winning a war, you often picture tanks, planes, maybe massive battleships slugging it out.
Right. The hardware, the kinetic stuff.
Exactly. But today, we're talking about a different kind of weapon, maybe the most powerful kind. We're digging into how the Battle of Midway, really a pivotal moment in the Pacific War, was arguably won before a single shot was fired in the main engagement.
That's the core of it. It wasn't just about the bravery of the pilots, though that was immense. It was fundamentally about intelligence, about knowing.
And we're not starting on a carrier deck. We're starting, believe it or not, in a rather stuffy basement. The date is May 27th, 1942.
Yeah, and that date is crucial. You have to remember the context. It's only been about 6 months since Pearl Harbor. America is, well, frankly, America's getting hammered across the Pacific. Morale is low.
Things look pretty bleak.
Very bleak. And then Admiral Chester Nimitz, who's in charge of the Pacific Fleet, he gets this intelligence report. And it's not just, the Japanese might attack somewhere. It's stunningly specific.
Let's really zero in on that specificity, because it sounds almost unbelievable, like something out of fiction.
It really does. The report didn't just say, hey, they're probably going after Midway Island.
Which was already a big deal to identify the target. A huge deal. But it went so much further. It named the date, June 4th. Okay? Then it gave the exact time the attack would commence. 0700 hours. 0700. Wow.
And wait, there's more. It specified the launch position, bearing 325 degrees, 175 miles northwest of Midway.
That's not intelligence. That's a script for the battle.
Oh.
Calendar, clock, compass, and distance, handed right to Nimitz.
Precisely. And when a commander gets that level of certainty about the enemy, what they're going to do, where they'll be, when they'll do it, it just changes everything. You shift from defense, from reacting, to actually setting a trap.
It's the difference between scumbling in the dark and turning on the floodlights.
Exactly. This wasn't just good intel. It was like historical gold. It fundamentally altered the strategic landscape before the first plane took off. We talk a lot about the Japanese mistakes at Midway, and there were some, but you can argue the battle was lost for them the moment this report landed on Nimitz's desk.
A real triumph of, as you said, brains over battleships. Information is the ultimate weapon.
It really established that principle for modern warfare, I think.
So that's our mission today. We're going deep into the source material about the team, the place that produced this, miracle report. We're heading into the world of Station Hypo.
Hypo, yeah. Located in Pearl Harbor.
Led by Commander Joseph Rochefort. We need to unpack how this pretty small, maybe even eccentric group of codebreakers, under insane pressure, basically in isolation, managed to do this. How they quietly turned the tide using intercepted radio noise and sheer brain power.
It's the ultimate asymmetric warfare story, isn't it? Using insight, pure intellect, to counter overwhelming physical force. Because, let's be clear, in 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy seemed unstoppable. They were the overwhelming force.
Right. To really get the scale of Station Hypo's achievement, we need to paint that picture of just how desperate things were for the U.S. Navy back then.
Desperate is the right word. After Pearl Harbor, Japan just ran riot across the Pacific. It was relentless.
Non-stop bad news.
Totally. They conquered the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Guam, Wake Island. The list just goes on. They secured vital resources, controlled the sea lanes. It genuinely felt like the rising sun flag was going to cover the whole map.
The perception must have been crushing, both for the public and within the military. Like, are we actually going to lose this?
Absolutely. There was a real fear that the U.S. West Coast could be next. Japan had established not just physical dominance, but this psychological edge, too, built on speed, surprise, audacity.
And U.S. Navy morale.
It was low, understandably low. They needed a win. Badly. Not just a skirmish, but a decisive turning point. But the problem was, the U.S. just didn't have the ships, the planes, the resources to go toe-to-toe in a conventional fight yet. The fleet was still rebuilding.
So they couldn't rely on brute force. They needed an edge. They needed foresight. Exactly. They needed to know what was coming, to be smarter, to anticipate. And that crucial foresight, that edge, came from this unlikely place, Station Hypo, a windowless, probably poorly ventilated, dimly lit basement space. Where was it exactly?
Tucked away beneath the 14th Naval District Headquarters building in Pearl Harbor. Not exactly glamorous.
Hardly the image of a war room deciding the fate of the Pacific.
Yep.
So what was the core challenge? What technical mountain were they trying to climb down there?
The mountain was the main Japanese naval operational code. It was known to U.S. intelligence as JN-25. And the Japanese considered it, pretty much unbreakable.
Why a JN-25? Why was it considered so tough?
It was complex. Really complex for the time. It wasn't just a simple substitution cipher, where A equals X or something. It was a two-part system, which makes breaking it exponentially harder.
Okay, 2 parts. How did that work? Can you break that down?
Sure. So first you had the basic code book. Imagine a massive dictionary. Okay. But instead of words and definitions, it had over 30,000 five-digit code groups. Each number group stood for a Japanese word or a phrase or maybe a ship's name or a location, like aircraft carrier or attack or Midway.
30,000 groups.
Yeah.
Just rebuilding that dictionary sounds like a lifetime's work. It's enormous. But that was only the first layer. The second part was the real killer, an additive cipher.
Additive.
Yeah. Before they transmitted the message, which was already encoded using those five-digit groups from the codebook, they took a second book filled with seemingly random five-digit numbers, the additive book, and they mathematically added a sequence of these random numbers to the code groups in the message.
Wait, so they scrambled the already scrambled message? Exactly. It's like putting a lock on top of another lock. And the really tricky part, they changed that additive sequence, the key for the scrambling, regularly, sometimes daily, sometimes every few days.
So even if you somehow managed to steal or reconstruct part of that main 30,000 group dictionary,
It wouldn't matter for the current messages. Because unless you also figured out the specific additive numbers used for that particular day's transmissions, the message would still look like complete gibberish. You'd just have scrambled numbers.
okay, that sounds less like code breaking and more like some kind of extreme intellectual torture chamber. Rebuild a massive dictionary and guess a constantly changing random key.
It required a very particular kind of mind, and maybe a very particular kind of leader. Which brings us to Commander Joseph Rochefort.
Right, the head of Station Hypo. Our sources paint him as brilliant, but definitely not your standard issue naval officer.
Not at all. He was the definition of unconventional, and that was probably key to Hypo's success. He understood that cracking JN-25 wasn't going to happen following standard Navy protocols 9 to 5.
What was so unconventional about him? The image that comes across is almost eccentric.
Well, he basically lived in that basement. He understood the need for total immersion, absolute focus. The stories are legendary. Apparently, he often worked in his smoking jacket, slippers, maybe even a bathrobe.
Seriously, a bathrobe. In a naval intelligence unit during wartime.
That's the legend. Surviving on endless cups of black coffee, maybe catching a few hours sleep on a cot in the corner, he was driven by this sheer obsession to break the code. And that dedication set the tone for the whole team.
So he created a unique environment down there.
Completely. It was results-oriented. Forget strict military hierarchy and protocol for a moment. The priority was analysis, breaking the code. His team worked insane hours, 18, sometimes 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. They got into a rhythm, a shared obsessive focus that, frankly, the more bureaucratic intelligence offices back in Washington probably couldn't even comprehend, let alone replicate.
It sounds like he understood that sometimes the most rigid problems, like an unbreakable code, require the most flexible, maybe even nonconformist, thinking to solve them, prioritizing comfort and focus over appearances.
Precisely. He trusted his people, even the junior analysts. He backed their findings, sometimes against skepticism from higher-ups in D.C. He created this intellectual sanctuary almost, where brilliant minds could just dive deep into the abstract patterns of numbers and language, shielded from the usual military bureaucracy.
They weren't just crunching numbers, they were architects.
He saw them that way, the unseen architects of victory. Their job was to provide the foresight, the intelligence edge that would allow the fleet, the actual fighting force, to survive and win.
And the team itself, the people Rochefort gathered in this sanctuary, wasn't just mathematicians, right? Our sources mention a really diverse, almost eclectic mix. It's fascinating, really. A perfect example of finding talent wherever you can. Of course, you had the core experts you'd expect. Linguists, absolutely crucial for understanding the nuances of Japanese language structure and usage, which helps in code breaking. Makes sense.
And cryptanalysts, the specialists in breaking codes, plus mathematicians to handle the sheer volume of numerical analysis. But the really famous, maybe surprising element was the inclusion of former Navy bandsmen. Musicians in a code-breaking unit. That still sounds kind of counterintuitive. How does playing the trombone help you crack JN-25?
Well, think about what skilled musicians do, especially those who read complex scores or improvise, like in jazz. They are masters of pattern recognition. They hear rhythms, variations, structures, repetitions, subtle shifts.
Okay, I see where you're going. Now, look at JN-25 intercepts. It's just this long, chaotic stream of five-digit numbers. The Codebreakers' job is to find the hidden patterns in that chaos, the recurring sequences that might mean attack or carrier, the underlying rhythm.
So the musicians, with their highly trained ears and eyes for patterns and variations.
They were incredibly good at spotting those anomalies, those structural similarities, the frequencies that might stick out, things a purely mathematical approach might miss. They could almost hear the structure in the noise.
Looking for numerical melody hidden in the static, that really reframes how you think about staffing for intelligence work. It's about cognitive skills, not just credentials.
It was brilliant, really, using unconventional talent to make up for a lack of high-tech resources. Because that's the other thing. They were fighting this incredibly modern war, carrier planes, sophisticated naval tactics.
But their tools were basic.
Incredibly basic by today's standards. No supercomputers, no satellites, none of that. They had pencil and paper, lots of it, big charts, filing systems, and their most advanced piece of tech. It was borrowed from the Census Bureau, actually. IBM punch card machines.
Ah, the punch cards. We hear about them, but how exactly did they help crack a sophisticated code like JN25? What were they actually doing with those machines?
They were indispensable, mainly because of the sheer volume of data. Station Hypo was intercepting thousands upon thousands of these 5-digit Japanese message groups every single day, trying to manually cross-reference and find repetitions across months, maybe years of this traffic, utterly impossible by hand.
Just too much information.
Way too much. The IBM sorters provided a way to mechanize the frequency analysis. You'd have analysts punch the 5-digit groups from intercepted messages onto these cards, one group per card, or maybe related groups on a card. Then you could feed stacks of these cards into the IBM machine, and it could rapidly sort them. It could find every card that had a specific 5-digit number, or every card where certain number patterns appeared in specific positions within the group.
So if they had a hunch, say that the group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meant aircraft carrier.
Bingo. They could set the machine to pull every single card from their entire library of intercepted messages that contained 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instantly, they could see where and when that group appeared, what other groups it appeared with. It massively accelerated the process of finding patterns and confirming meanings.
It allowed them to test hypotheses really quickly against a huge data set.
Exactly. It helped them find what codebreakers call cribs sections, where they think they know the underlying plain text, maybe from a previous break or a repeated standard message format. By comparing knowns against unknowns using the sorters and combining that with traffic analysis.
Okay, hold on. You mentioned traffic analysis. Let's clarify that because the sources emphasize it was just as important as the code breaking itself, right? What's the difference?
Crucial difference. And it was really Rochefort's particular strength and Hypo's edge. Cryptanalysis is the process of actually breaking the cipher, figuring out the meaning of the encoded message, translating the numbers back into Japanese words. It's highly mathematical, linguistic.
Okay, breaking the code itself.
Right. Traffic analysis, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily rely on reading the message content. It's about analyzing the metadata around the messages. Who is sending the message? Who is receiving it? How often are they communicating? What radio frequencies are they using? Is the volume of traffic increasing or decreasing between certain stations? What are the call signs being used?
So even if you can't read what they're saying, you can learn a lot from how they're saying it and who's talking to whom.
A tremendous amount. For example, if suddenly there's a massive surge in encoded radio traffic between the main Japanese fleet command and carrier divisions using specific high-priority procedural signs, you know something big is about to happen, even if you haven't cracked that day's additive key yet.
And Rochefort's genius was putting those two together.
Yes. He understood that cryptanalysis and traffic analysis weren't separate disciplines. They were two halves of the same coin. The traffic analysis could provide context and clues that helped the cryptanalysts focus their efforts. Maybe the math team was stuck on a particular message, but the traffic analyst could say, look, based on the call signs and the routing, this message almost certainly relates to naval air operations in the Central Pacific. That context could provide the crucial hint needed to break the code. That synergy makes sense. And it led them directly to the big problem, the critical ambiguity they faced just before Midway. The mysterious designation AF. Right. This code group, AF, kept popping up constantly in the intercepted JN25 traffic. They knew it designated a significant upcoming objective, a major target for a large-scale Japanese operation. But the huge, dangerous question was, what or where was AF?
And there was an agreement on that.
No, and this caused a major rift within U.S. naval intelligence. Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo in Hawaii, using their combined cryptanalysis and, importantly, their deep understanding of the traffic patterns where the messages were originating, who was involved. They became increasingly convinced that AF was the code for Midway Atoll.
Okay, Hypo says Midway. What about Washington?
The main intelligence unit back in Washington, OP-20G, was much more skeptical. They were physically distant, maybe relied more heavily on pure mathematical cryptanalysis, and perhaps lacked some of Hypo's intuitive feel for the operational context derived from traffic analysis. They weren't convinced. They floated other possibilities. Maybe AF was somewhere in the Aleutian Islands up north, maybe even Hawaii itself again, or somewhere else entirely.
That disagreement is terrifying from a strategic perspective. Nimitz has a limited number of carriers, the only real offensive power he has left.
Exactly. He can't afford to guess wrong. If he sends his carriers north to defend the Aleutians based on Washington's hunch, and the main Japanese fleet actually hits Midway as Rochefort suspects, it's catastrophic. He could lose Midway and potentially his carriers when they rush back south.
The pressure on Rochefort to prove his case must have been immense.
Unbelievable pressure. He knew he was right, but he needed undeniable proof to convince Nimitz and overcome the skepticism from D.C. And traditional code breaking, trying to find a message that explicitly said AF is Midway might take too long. The Japanese fleet was already sailing.
So time is running out. He needs a shortcut. He needs confirmation now.
Which led to one of the most clever and incredibly risky intelligence ploys of the war, a true stroke of genius, highlighting Rochefort's resourcefulness and his willingness to think outside the standard operational box.
This is the famous deception plan.
The water shortage deception. Rochefort essentially proposed using the Japanese themselves to confirm the meaning of AF. He went to Nimitz with this daring idea.
Which was?
He convinced Nimitz to authorize the U.S. garrison on Midway Island itself to send out a specific radio message. Critically, this message was to be sent unencrypted, in plain English, over a channel they knew the Japanese monitored.
Sending an unencrypted message about a potential target. That sounds like a massive security risk. What if the Japanese realized it was a trick?
It was a huge risk, colossal. But it was calculated. The key was the content of the message. It wasn't overtly military. It was designed to sound like a genuine, mundane logistical problem. The message stated that Midway's vital freshwater condenser plant, the machinery that turns seawater into drinking water, had suffered a serious breakdown.
So they were reporting a critical water shortage on the island.
Exactly. Midway running low on fresh water require immediate assistance. Something along those lines. Plausible, urgent, but seemingly just internal logistical chatter. Rochefort banked on the Japanese signals intelligence picking this up and believing it was authentic low-level traffic. He understood their doctrine. They listened to everything, including supposedly routine, unencrypted messages.
So they deliberately leak this fake problem into the ether, knowing the Japanese are listening.
And then they wait. They watch the encrypted JN-25 traffic like hawks, waiting to see if the Japanese mention this supposed water shortage at AF.
Using the enemy's own secure communications to verify the leak? That's brilliant.
It's elegant, isn't it? And it worked perfectly. Just 2 days after Midway sent the fake distress call, Station Hypo intercepted and decrypted a new Japanese JN-25 message. And the message contained the crucial phrase, something to the effect of, AF is short on water.
Wow. They took the bait. They confirmed it themselves.
Hook, line, and sinker. The Japanese Navy, using its own top-secret code system, had just definitively confirmed to the Americans that their target, AS, was indeed Midway Island. Irrefutable proof.
That moment in the Hypo basement, I mean, the relief, the exhilaration, they must have known they'd just handed Nimitz the keys to the kingdom.
Absolutely. Rochefort had delivered the ultimate prize for any commander. Not just confirmation of the target, but confirmation derived from the enemy's own actions. He gave Nimitz certainty. He gave him time. He allowed Nimitz to move from guessing to planning a perfect ambush. So let's shift to that. Nimitz now has this unprecedented intelligence advantage. He knows the what, the where, the when. How does he use this information, given his fleet is still outnumbered and recovering?
Nimitz's handling of this intelligence is a masterclass in naval strategy. He knows the main Japanese fleet under Admiral Nagumo is coming with 4 heady carriers, a powerful force. But Nimitz has the element of surprise, thanks to Hypo. What forces did he have available? He scraped together everything he could. 3 American carriers, the USS Enterprise and the USS Hornet, which were relatively intact, and crucially the USS Yorktown. Yorktown had been badly damaged just weeks before at the Battle of the Coral Sea.
Right, they rushed repairs on Yorktown at Pearl Harbor, didn't they? In just a couple of days.
Incredible feat. Dock workers basically worked around the clock, patching her up just enough to get her back into the fight. Her presence was absolutely vital. So Nimitz has these 3 carriers against Nagumo's 4. Still outnumbered, but he has the intel.
So how does he position them? He doesn't just park them off Midway waiting, right?
That would give the game away. The intelligence dictated a very specific and quite revolutionary deployment. Nimitz didn't put his carriers near Midway to defend it directly, at least not initially. Instead, he sent them to a waiting position far to the northeast of Midway Atoll, a spot designated Point Luck.
Northeast. Why there? Several reasons. First, it was far enough away, and in a direction the Japanese wouldn't expect, that it was well outside the likely search patterns of the initial Japanese reconnaissance planes launched from Nagumo's carriers as they approached Midway from the northwest. He wanted his carriers to remain hidden beyond the horizon.
Okay, concealment. What else?
Critically, that northeast position put the American carriers perfectly on the flank of the Japanese carrier force after the Japanese had launched their first strike against Midway Island itself.
So let the Japanese commit first.
Exactly. Let them launch their planes, focus all their attention on bombing Midway. The Japanese expected any American response to come later, maybe from Pearl Harbor or defensively near the island. Nimitz planned to hit them when they were most vulnerable, recovering their first strike aircraft, rearming for a second wave, their flight decks crowded and chaotic.
He used the intelligence not just to know where they'd be, but to predict their operational tempo, their moment of maximum vulnerability.
Precisely. He was setting an ambush on a grand scale, entirely enabled by Rochefort's precise timeline.
And did that timeline hold up? Did the attack come when predicted?
Like clockwork. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, at exactly 0700 hours, the precise time Station Hypo had forecast weeks earlier, Japanese carrier aircraft appeared in the skies over Midway and began their bombing runs.
Incredible. That must have been a moment of grim satisfaction for Nimitz. The prediction was spot on.
It validated everything. The U.S. forces weren't caught off guard, scrambling to react. They knew the attack was coming. They knew where the enemy carriers were. And thanks to Nimitz's positioning, they were poised to strike back decisively.
And that strike, when it came, was devastating, right? Because the Japanese were caught completely unprepared for an attack on their own carriers at that moment.
Utterly unprepared. The American dive bombers, arriving from that unexpected northeast flank, found the Japanese carriers in exactly that state of maximum vulnerability Nimitz had anticipated. Planes were being refueled and rearmed on the flight decks. Bombs and torpedoes were stacked haphazardly as they debated switching armament from land attack bombs, for Midway, to torpedoes, for ships, as they just spotted the U.S. fleet. Fuel lines were full.
A recipe for disaster.
An absolute inferno. In a matter of minutes, American bombs turned the decks of 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, into raging fires. A 4th carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterstrike that crippled the Yorktown, but Hiryu herself was found and sunk later that day.
4 frontline Japanese fleet carriers lost in a single day.
4 of their best. And incredibly poignantly, these were the very same 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, that had launched the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier.
The symmetry is just stunning. It's hard to overstate the impact of losing those 4 carriers and their experienced pilots for Japan.
It was a catastrophic blow. Irreparable, really. Japan simply couldn't replace those ships or, crucially, those veteran air crews quickly. Midway permanently shifted the strategic initiative in the Pacific War to the United States. Japan went from relentless offense to a long, grinding defense.
And all because of the information advantage.
Fundamentally, Midway proved, maybe for the first time so dramatically in modern warfare, that intelligence superiority could be the decisive factor. It wasn't just about having more ships or planes, it was about knowing where and when to use the forces you had. The battle was won by insight, by the intellectual heavy lifting done in that Pearl Harbor basement. Information was the weapon.
Okay, so the tide turns in the Pacific. A massive victory, directly attributable to the work of Station Hypo and Commander Rochefort. Surely this means parades, medals, promotions for Rochefort, right? He should be a national hero.
You would think so. That's what should have happened. But unfortunately, this is where the story takes a really disheartening, frankly infuriating turn.
What?
Instead of being celebrated, Rochefort, the man arguably most responsible for the victory, was effectively punished. He was denied credit, sidelined, and pushed out.
Denied credit. Why? How?
It boils down to internal politics. bureaucracy, jealousy, and intense rivalries within the U.S. Navy's own intelligence community. The enemy wasn't Japan in this case, it was Washington, D.C.
Seriously, what was the source of the friction? Was it just professional jealousy that this outlier group in Hawaii got the glory?
That was a big part of it. The main friction was between Rochefort's Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor and the Centralized Naval Intelligence Organization back in Washington, OP-20G. The leadership there, particularly a Captain John Safford, were much more traditional by-the-book types.
And Rochefort was anything but.
Exactly. Rochefort was seen as this maverick, this cowboy operating outside the normal channels. He didn't always follow protocol to the letter. He trusted his team's analysis over directives from D.C. when they conflicted, and his unconventional methods worked spectacularly, which unfortunately made the more rigid, centralized bureaucracy in Washington look slow, hesitant, and ultimately wrong about AF.
So his success was seen as an indictment of them. His being right about AF was perceived almost like insubordination.
That's pretty much it. It's hard to believe, but yes. Instead of acknowledging Hypo's vital contribution, the powers that be in Washington seemed determined to minimize it. They clung to the idea that Hypo had just gotten lucky or that their methods were somehow unsound, even after Midway proved them right.
It's mind-boggling. Punishing the guy who gave you the win because he didn't fill out the forms correctly, metaphorically speaking.
Or because he wore a smoking jacket while doing it. There was resentment over his independence streak, his direct line to Nimitz, which sometimes bypassed Washington, and the fact that his instincts, his hunch, backed by brilliant analysis, proved correct when the established DC group was hedging its bets. He was seen as a threat to the established order.
So what did they do to them?
The bureaucracy got its revenge, quietly but effectively. Later in 1942, not long after the Midway triumph, Rochefort was reassigned. Removed from Station Hypo, removed from codebreaking entirely.
Where did they send him?
To a command overseeing a floating dry dock and salvage operations up in San Francisco. A perfectly respectable job, but a million miles away from the high-stakes intelligence work where he had proven so uniquely brilliant. He was effectively silenced, pushed aside.
And he never really got public recognition during his lifetime.
No. Bound by the intense secrecy surrounding signals intelligence, he couldn't speak publicly about his role or Hypo's achievements. He served out the rest of his naval career quietly, honorably, but without any public acknowledgement of his absolutely critical contribution to winning the war in the Pacific.
That's just tragic. Did that ever get corrected?
Eventually, yes. But it took far, far too long. Rochefort passed away in 1976. It wasn't until a decade later, in 1986, that the wheels of recognition finally turned.
What happened in '86?
Following efforts by former colleagues and naval historians who knew the true story, President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded Commander Joseph Rochefort the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. It was a formal, public acknowledgement of his extraordinary service and his pivotal role in the Midway victory.
Belated justice, at least. It finally put his name where it belonged, among the true heroes of the war. The intellectual hero in the smoking jacket.
It did. It cemented his legacy, though sadly he wasn't alive to see it.
And that legacy, it's not just about Midway, is it? The work done at Station Hypo had much broader implications. It really laid the groundwork for modern intelligence gathering.
Oh, absolutely. Station Hypo's success wasn't just a one-off. It established fundamental principles for modern signals intelligence, what we call SIGINT. Their integrated approach combining the linguistic analysis, the mathematical code breaking, and crucially, that contextual traffic analysis proved the strategic value of continuous, dedicated intelligence efforts.
They showed it wasn't just about tactical warnings like torpedo boats sighted. It was about strategic foresight, predicting major operations weeks in advance.
Exactly. They weren't just reporting what the enemy was doing, they were figuring out what the enemy would do. That's a whole different level of intelligence impact.
So you can draw a direct line from that basement in Pearl Harbor to the massive intelligence agencies we have today.
You absolutely can. The lessons learned at hyperperbole, the need for speed, for integrating different types of analysis, for operational security, and maybe most importantly, for trusting that contextual metadata from traffic analysis alongside the pure code breaking, all of that heavily influenced how post-war intelligence organizations were structured and operated.
Like the NSA.
Precisely. The success of operations like Station Hypo provided a powerful argument for creating large, dedicated organizations focused solely on signals intelligence, like the National Security Agency. Hypo's methods, successes, and even the bureaucratic battles Rochefort faced helped shape the doctrine and culture of modern SIGINT. They fundamentally changed how nations prepare for and fight wars.
Shifting the focus from purely military might to this ongoing battle for informational superiority, which continues today, obviously, in cyber warfare, information operations. It's all part of the same continuum. Station Hypo was one of the critical birthplaces of that entire concept. Information is the most powerful weapon. It really brings it full circle. From that moment of desperation in 1942, this handful of brilliant, maybe eccentric people working in rudimentary conditions, armed with little more than pencils, punch cards, and their own intellect.
Yeah, managed to change the course of history.
It's an incredible story. And a powerful reminder, too.
Definitely. It shows that sometimes, maybe often, strategic breakthroughs don't come from the biggest organizations or the largest budgets. They come from small teams of agile, unconventional thinkers, given the freedom and the trust to pursue patterns and ideas that everyone else might be missing or dismissing.
The enduring legacy of Commander Joseph Rochefort and Station Hypo. Thank you. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure. It's a story that deserves to be told. And for you, our listeners, here's something to think about. Rochefort's team found victory by looking for the hidden patterns in the noise, in the raw, chaotic data streams that others ignored or couldn't decipher. So in whatever complex field you work in, maybe you're analyzing market data, scientific results, social trends, organizational dynamics, ask yourself, are you just looking at the official reports, the obvious signals? Or are you actively searching for your own station hypo? Are you dedicating time and intellectual energy to find those subtle patterns, those traffic anomalies, the critical insights hidden in the static that everyone else misses? Because as Midway shows, victory doesn't always go to the side with the biggest guns or the largest budget. Sometimes it belongs to those who can simply see the truth before anyone else.